This side. Getting to the point where I can't stand up the entire time in my old age and I have to sit down as I preach. And I've already made a lot of enemies by just saying that, which is why we're talking about forgiveness today. No, we are not. We're talking about community today. And interspersed in that discussion on community, we're talking about Christian community and the difference between the two. We're finishing up our series on good news and bad news, which has run for a long time, but it's been awesome working through the book of Romans, and we're on chapter 16, the last chapter today. And I already mentioned Christian community, and I'm a cynical person more than I realized. I guess I didn't realize how cynical I was until my wife said, "No, you're pretty cynical all the time about things." And when you sometimes hear a word like Christian community that has the word Christian before it, maybe you're like me, but you've seen a lot of times where Christianity has taken an idea or a concept, has repackaged it, but it presents it as something Christian, something better, but it's essentially the exact same thing. There are some things that have the word Christian be like before it that are great things. Like there's good institutions, good materials when it comes to Christian education. There's a lot of great stuff out there. And then there's some Christian education that does not deserve the word education in the same sentence. There is good, fantastic Christian music. There is some amazing artists out there who do phenomenal jobs. And that place is included here. Kelly does a phenomenal job. And then there's some Christian music that does not deserve the word music in the same sentence because of the way it's constructed. And the same goes with the concept of community. Christians can gather together. Christians can sit in the same room and do things together. But that does not mean that they're in community. That does not mean that they're actually experiencing that in their midst. And really, with this idea of community, chapter 16, it really isn't the thing that you see probably at the forefront if you read it, but it's very much the emotional undercurrent that is taking place in this passage. Because the first 16 verses of Romans 16, Paul essentially is saying farewell to a lot of people. He's mentioning people by name, and in some instances he's mentioning people, specific things that they have done for him, ways they have served the Lord, ways that he appreciates them. And he lists all of these people, and you can tell that he really loves these people. And then he transitions into this really harsh tone, talking about division, talking about what causes division within the church. And for a lot of people and commentators who have read that is confusing, and some have even proposed that the person that wrote verses 17 through 20 wasn't Paul, because it seems completely different. But if you realize the current that's taking place emotionally in this passage, it makes complete sense. Because he is talking about people that he loves. He's talking about a community that he knows and holds dearly. And when you hold something dearly, one of your biggest fears in life is going to be the loss of that thing. If you ever want to do inventory of your life and ask yourself, what is it that you value the most? What you fear, what you stay up worrying about, what you spend your heart on in that way is going to be very much attached to what you love and care about the most in your life. And when Paul is reflecting on the community, and this is a good thing, he's reflecting on the love that he has for this community. The fear that is taking place emotionally is a fear of the loss of this. This can be disrupted so easily. This can be destroyed. And so I'm going to read to you those 4 verses, 17 through 20, where Paul talks about division as soon as my notes load. Now, there we go. I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrines that you have been taught. Avoid them, for such persons do not serve our Lord Christ, but their own appetites, and by smooth talk and flattery they deceive the hearts of the naive. For your obedience is known to all, so that I rejoice over you. But I want you to be wise as to what is good and innocent as to what is evil. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. I feel like I have to preface a little bit that if you're here today and you're visiting and you're a first-time guest, awesome that you are here today. By the way, we have a new card in front of you called New Here. You should check that out and fill it out before you head out. But I want to put your mind at ease because we're talking about Christian community, but this is not going to be a conversation that's exclusively for Christians. Because inside the concept of community that you will find everywhere at home, in your workplace where you go on Friday and Saturday nights, and in the 4 walls of the church, you will experience the same aspects that Paul is talking about. You will experience the danger of division, the danger of conflict. And what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about a few things within division that are like major things that cause divisions within community. And I don't think any of it's going to really shock us or surprise us. I think we've all probably seen this before. But I also want to talk about the call to Christian community and why that is so unique, why Christian community deserves its own definition from just the normal word community, because it is radically and transformatively different than a normal concept of community. And within Christian community, there's a call that Jesus lays in our life that is very profound. And honestly, I feel like it's something that just was even hard to articulate at times. But I want to kind of take us through that journey. Again, I was told I was cynical when I said this, but I was practicing my sermon to Lexi, and I said that whenever you have two people in the same room, you always have the danger of conflict. And it's true. Whenever you have a group of people together, whenever you have any sort of organization or business or church or friends, there's always the danger of conflict. And you know what's so fascinating is I said, like, the reason Paul probably wrote this thing so harshly is because of the emotions that he was experiencing while writing this. And you know, something really fascinating happened to me when I was like practicing this and I was roaming around stage, talking to myself like a crazy person, talking about the idea of community. I do not consider myself a weepy person. Do not consider myself a crier by any means. But even practicing this out loud to myself with no one in the room, I had to stop because there were tears in my eyes as I thought about the moments in my life when I've experienced real community and what that has felt like, what that has been like to me, how that has impacted me in ways that I can't even articulate accurately and probably never will. Because one of the deepest needs of our heart, and Tim Keller, a pastor in New York, proposes the deepest need of our heart outside of Jesus Christ is community. It is the deepest need of your heart to have those type of relationships. And there are certain things in our life that are so unique that you can't ever quite describe them, but nothing's going to ever quite replace them. If you've ever experienced the birth of your own child, which I have not, but some of my friends recently, Jeremy and Joanna Gibson, had a child, and what they have said repeatedly is nothing prepares you for that moment. You can read about it, you can talk to people about it, they can give you advice, they can do all these things, but nothing prepares you for that. The same with marriage. Nothing can quite prepare you for that moment. You can read about it, you can talk about it, you can get counseling, you can do all these things, but nothing's going to quite prepare you for that. And the same, I think, goes for community. There is an experience where you thrive in a way that you cannot thrive anywhere else outside of community. You can't replace it. You can't make it. You can't artificially find it anywhere else. But it is a deep, deep need of our heart. And so I say this, and I say this a little bit of tongue-in-cheek and a little bit of bravery, is I really, really think that you can find that here. I really, really do. I think, honestly, River's Edge, from my very biased perspective, but being a little bit new, is one of the best places to find that in this area. It is very, very hard to find the healthiness that exists within these four walls in the world. And that's just my unbiased opinion. But it really is. But because community is so important, if for some reason, after you being here, after you trying to find it here, you cannot find it here, it is more important for you to find that somewhere, even if that's not here. Because it is that important to you. It is that essential in your life that you have to find that somewhere. I think it's very likely, I hope, we're going to do our best that you find that here, but if you cannot, I don't want you to come through the door because you take a number in our minds that makes us feel like we're being successful. I want you to go somewhere and I want you to thrive. And I can say the same for Chase, and Trent would say the same thing. We want you to thrive. And so when we have community, because I think there's a very healthy community here at River's Edge, and really all that I have to say today, even the things that cause division, I don't think they really exist. I think exist within these walls. I don't think it's something that we're really facing. But there are things to be warned of. And like I said, one of the things that causes division, obviously, is conflict. I think it's kind of the obvious thing. And if there are three things that Chase is passionate about, it's Taco Bell, skinny jeans, and how to handle conflict healthily. He really will. Yeah, there we go. I'm getting that confirmation. But like every once or twice a year, he will preach a sermon solely on how to deal with conflict in a healthy way, because it is that important. And like I said, whenever you have two people in the room, the danger of conflict is always there. And so what I want to do with you guys today is I want to talk about conflict. I want to talk about very quickly the 4 steps of dealing with conflict in a healthy way that Chase has outlined. I don't want to steal much from that sermon. And then I'm going to continue on with other things that cause division within communities, definitely in any community, even outside the church. But when you're in conflict with somebody, I want to go over the 4 rules of what that means and how that functions. Before I get to the 4 rules, I just have to say, obviously, when you're in conflict with somebody, your responsibility is to go to that person you have conflict with. Your responsibility is not to talk to people around the conflict. Your responsibility is not to vent about it on any other form of interaction, social media, or whatever it may be. Your responsibility is to go to the person you have conflict with, and when you have that conversation, you need to be honest about what you're feeling. Because one of the most aggravating things that I ever hear when someone's angry with me is, I'm fine. I'm fine. No, you're not. I know you're not. But, I'm fine. No, it's not a big deal. You need to be honest about how you feel, about what's going on, what hurts you in that process. You also need to keep current. It's amazing how in so many conversations, that come up when someone's hurt, things from 10 years ago come up. And sometimes those things are really relevant, totally are. Sometimes those things do make sense, but sometimes there are ideas or emotions that feel the same, but aren't actually the thing that we're dealing with. Also, we need to make sure that in keeping current, we do not let time just span on when we're angry with somebody. There's a lot of biblical principles that say you need to talk to the person within 24 hours of when that's taken place. Maybe not the first minute, because maybe you're too hyped up for that moment to have a good conversation, but not letting the devil have a foothold in your heart, not letting the foothold of bitterness settle in, not letting the foothold of you assuming all these things you have no right to assume to set in. Rule number 3 is making sure that you attack the problem and not the person, because even if you feel like you know what they are doing, know the assumptions behind what they're doing, know their motivations, know that they had these reasons to do so, the reality is you don't. You don't actually know why the person did what they did or said what they did. You may have your assumptions, but you really don't. So do not attack the person. Make sure that you deal with the actual problem that's taking place. And then finally, the quick to forgive thing. And I think this is the hardest and oftentimes easily glazed over one. Because when Jesus and when the Bible talks about forgiveness, it also couples it with practical affection. When Jesus said if someone strikes you, you turn the other cheek, what he's not saying is turn the other cheek so they can strike you there. Turning the other cheek was a sign of offering a cheek for a kiss. It was an act of friendship. When Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, who originally wanted to murder him, but instead sold him into slavery, thanks guys, when he forgave them, he embraced them. He trusted them, and he wept when he realized that they did not trust him back yet. Forgiveness has practical affection associated with it. And that's a really, really, really quick overview of an entire sermon that if you ever have the chance to hear, you should, because it's super important with how we deal with conflict. But I want to transition to a little bit of what causes conflict. What are some essential things that in bodies, really kind of create a divide in any community? And I think the easy one to talk about first is gossip. Once I was mentioning the list of sins to my teens in my last youth group, and I think we're talking about things like, drugs, and, we're talking about premarital sex, and we're talking about how you treat other people. And I mentioned gossip, and somebody in the back was like, oh, no. Because gossip is not one of those things that is really on the high list of sins that we're going to be super worried about, It's not one of those things that has those immediate consequences like other sins in our life. Therefore, it's deemed a little bit less worthy. But the interesting thing about gossip is it destroys community quicker than most any other thing outside of tragedy that I have found. When you've walked into a workplace, one of the first things that you will hear gossiped about is probably going to be your boss. That's probably true almost everywhere you go. There seems like there's always some sort of gossip going around about the person higher up. And if you're naive enough, you accept it as reality. You assume that's the way it is, and your entire perspective of that person is changed even though you have very little interactions with them whatsoever. Gossip distorts reality. It distorts what's actually taking place. It never provides you with an actual picture of the human being that you are dealing with. And it never provides you any sort of way to actually deal with the situation or community that you're in. It is simply information that you've been given by somebody who usually has a beef to pick in some way, shape, or form. But gossip goes deeper than that. Because originally I was going to talk about insecurity and gossip as 2 separate things, but they're really part of the same vein. Because sin in general, anything that we do is always attached to an identity issue. And when we gossip about somebody, when we are choosing to talk about somebody in some certain way, I want you to pay close attention next time. Because what you gossip about is tied to what you're insecure about. What you gossip about is tied to where your identity is the most fragile. And here's an example. I'm an extroverted person, and I consider myself a people person. And when I was part of a group in college, I considered myself the most extroverted person in that group. And for me, because of my insecurity and wanting to be liked by everybody, for me, knowing everybody and feeling liked by everybody was me scoring points as being the most popular person in the room, and that's how I felt whole. But then, inevitably, what happened? Someone came along who was more extroverted than me. And they were the new person, and they were more interesting and more exciting. And so what I found my identity in was being challenged. What I was insecure in was getting pinpointed. And so what did I gossip about, and who did I gossip about? That guy. I pinpointed that person's faults. I made assumptions about his motivations, pinpointed all the parts of him that were weak. Because the reality is what he was doing was making me feel insecure because my identity was in being liked. A lot of the things that we gossip about are attached to where our identity is the most fragile. We can gossip about how certain people look because our identity is fragile in that area. We can talk about how other people are more successful and gossip about how the way they achieved success was incorrect or wrong, or wasn't as ethical as it should have been, because we really wish that we had the success they had. We can gossip about what people do with their money, what other people do with whatever they have, and say, I wouldn't do that. But the reality is you wish you had the freedom or the funds that they had to do what they do. Unless there is some big black and white issue, much like Chase referred to last week, going on in a life that you have to address, most of the things you gossip about are gray areas. And 98% of them we have no business talking about. But if you've ever experienced being gossiped about, you know how defeating that is. When I was 20, I was at a really special event, and the funny thing is I'm going to talk about a scenario when I was gossiped about, but I have to say it in a way so I'm not gossiping about the people who gossiped about me. So it's kind of a tricky scenario to talk through. Interesting thing is I've talked to all these people in this story, so we're good. We've dealt with it. I handled conflict semi-appropriately in that moment, not as well as I could have. But I was at a special event in my friend's life, and at the time it was like 5 years ago. Man, that was like a long time ago. And the girl that I was dating, I guess that's not that long ago, but the girl I was dating at the time was not Lexi because I hadn't met her yet. And we were at this event, and her parents were sitting at a table with a bunch of people that had known me, some since childhood, some for the last 5 years of my life at that point. And these are all people that I trusted. Some of these people I went to wisdom in my life for. They're people that I considered like mentors in my life. And then somebody made the ambiguous statement that Charlie did something in his last relationship that we weren't sure we liked. And what they were referring to is I went to my girlfriend's house over Christmas break with her family. That was it. That was literally it. And I'm like, okay. But again, their perspective on a gray area, which they are allowed to have. But you say that ambiguously to parents of a daughter that's being pursued, I would freak out too, And then the other people around the table were kind of like, yeah, this thing, and this thing, and that thing. And at the end of that day, we got broken up on purpose. Which in the end, not so sad about, but still, what hurt more was not that. It was that people that I trusted, I considered mentors, I went to for wisdom in my life, had chosen that moment to gossip about me. That was super hurtful. It disrupted a community. It disrupted a relationship that we have, that honestly we haven't had the space and time in life to ever really fully mend, because my life was moving on, and they were where they were at, and I was moving on where I was at. Gossip destroys so quickly what it takes years to settle, what it takes years to build up. Which is why if you have issue with somebody, your job and your responsibility is always to go to that person. Continuing through what causes division within churches and within organizations in general, one of the things that I feel like is super hard as a leader, and I think any leader in any circumstance deals with, is having to tell people no. Because what happens a lot of times is there's not an absence of great ideas in businesses or in churches. There's not an absence of ways that we can do things better. There's not a lack of ways that this church can impact the world. There's not a lack of things that we can do in the greater Lansing area. There's not a lack of things that we can do in the world. And every business faces this. There's so many different things you could do with your product. There's so many different ways that you can be involved in the community. There's so many different charities that you can be a part of. But every business and organization that wants to do well has to funnel themselves in a simple way to make sure that they keep at a certain amount of efficiency. And what I think is hard for us is when we have an idea about something that we're passionate about, that we love, that we think so-and-so or such a thing could do, and we get told no, that can hurt, and that can kind of ignite a process of us being embittered. And I have to be willing to hear no from Chase and Trent about my ideas, which I've had many that are bad, let's be real. But so do we all. Part of a functioning community is not being with a bunch of people that take everything we say and say, that is completely right. That's exactly what we're going to do. Every business owner knows they can't take every idea that their employees have. We have to be willing to hear no to things that are really great, things that are good ideas. But the reality is either we have a church that does a couple things really, really well, or we do a ton of things and all of our volunteers are freaking exhausted and have no energy left to do anything. The willingness to hear no, I think, is essential for community to function healthily. And the second to last, and the last one kind of veers into what causes community to really function well. But sometimes the illusion of community, which I'll explain, takes place. And this is called holy huddles in church lingo. This is when within groups, within communities, groups form. And that's a good thing. Because the reality is River's Edge, which is awesome, is too big for us to know everybody, which is why we're going to 2 services, which is really, really awesome that we're in that space. There are so many people that come in the door. There are so many guests that come. We just can't know everybody. And so we have groups that form within this space. And the same is for businesses. There are groups that form within businesses and organizations of friendships. The thing is we can be really, really nice to one another. But there are so many stories of people that go to churches for weeks, and no one says hi. There are so many stories of people that walk into businesses and organizations, it's their first job or it's their first time there, and there's an automatic relational wall between the old guard and the new. Because just because you are friendly to one another does not mean your community is functioning in a healthy way. Because churches will become stagnant, and they will close their doors, yet the people within love each other, and they get along with each other well. But they had an emotional wall towards people that were just a little bit different than they were, had a little bit different values, or either didn't go through the things historically that they had to go through to experience, weren't here when such event happened or when such experience happened, and so this wall forms. But stagnancy sets in when we do that, because new people bring new ideas, new energy of vibrancy, which I feel like you can feel in this room and feel in this church. But the minute that we start focusing that inward, our community is set towards a path of stagnancy. Yeah, we'll love each other, we'll get along, but that will not last. And if you've ever experienced that in a working place, you know how infuriating that experience is. So I feel like these are just some basic things that cause division. And again, I think, like I said, I don't think any of these things are like really shocking us right now. But I really want to talk about what causes unity. What is like the big essential thing that causes communities across the board to thrive? And for me, this was a little bit more surprising. Because over the last 2 decades, there has been a surplus of literature on one topic in businesses and churches, and it's the topic of mission and vision. Mission and vision, there are so many books, seminars, speakers, all of these ideas on mission and vision of organizations, businesses, and churches that have just been really in the market for the last 2 decades, which is awesome because mission and purpose and vision is super important. It gives focus, it gives drive, it gives walls to what you need to do. If you don't have it as a business organization or a church, it really kind of creates chaos because you don't really know where your purpose is. But here's the funny thing that I realized is that River's Edge Community Church's mission and vision, in reality, is not so unique that no other church has said the exact same thing or similar things at some point. Our goals as an entity I would make the assumption, and maybe it is, it's probably not that different than most other churches in the Lansing area. Most businesses have these same essential goals. You may word it differently. It may flow off the tongue a little differently. It may look simpler. It may look more complicated. Whatever it may be, the end goals, the end purpose and mission for most businesses and most churches is going to be essentially identical. It's just going to be expressed in different ways. There are churches that have fantastic visions and missions that collapse. There are businesses that have fantastic goals, an amazing purpose in the world, and close their doors. Which is so interesting to me because just because we have something fantastic on paper does not mean it's actually going to function that way practically. And here's what I think the key is. When Jesus was talking about how the world will know him, he said something that really is astounding. He said, the world will know me through you. They will know that you are my disciples, not because you preach the gospel really well, not because your vision and mission is fantastic, not because your building and programs are astounding, because of the love that you have for one another. Paul even said the exact same thing. I can have all the wisdom in the world. I can speak so well it causes all of you to cry instantly, essentially. I can preach the gospel in a way that's never been preached before. But if I do not preach so in love, I am a gong, a resounding, clanging gong that really is just making noise for the sake of making noise. In the world, in culture today, there's a lot of different things making noise. You go on social media, there's a lot of things that are grabbing your attention. There's a lot of noise out there. And what's interesting is one of the most missional, I would say, mission-oriented entities that I could think of as I'm going through this was actually the military, because they literally have they're enacting the definition of a mission. Their whole organization is built towards equipping people for a very specific purpose to accomplish a very specific goal together. And when that goal is accomplished, they go home and look at the next mission and do so. But you know what's interesting is veterans, when they are polled on what do you miss most about the military, they don't say the mission and purpose, they say the camaraderie, the relationships that we had with one another. And they'll be the first to admit they didn't like everybody there. But the camaraderie was so important that they ask, will I find that in the workplace? And most people are like, probably not. Because relationships are more important to us. They are more important to us functioning healthily. Community is the deepest need of our heart. And when the community is healthy, everything that flows through that is done in a more profound, more fantastic, more thriving way. Our gospel message alone, preached just from the pulpit here right now, is garbage unless there is love in this midst. Unless I love you, what I have to say today is pointless. And it's not me saying that. I think Scripture is saying that very clearly. Because what we do as Christians is we find the line in a legalistic fashion of how far we have to go to do the right thing. And then we just do what we feel like we're required to do. Because when we talk about loving one another, because we have to ask the question, okay, if that is the most important thing, how do we do that? And that is a really hard question. But Jesus, I think, makes a very, very significant point. If you ever want to read something amazing, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 in the New Testament, Jesus has a Sermon on the Mount, and he says these fantastic things about loving one another. He says, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, you go with them 2. And what he's referencing is Roman soldiers under law could take any conquered Israelite and require them at any point to walk with them 1 mile to carry them, help them carry something or do something. Under law, they can make them walk 1 mile. What is Jesus saying? If your enemy who has conquered you asks you to do one thing, go beyond that. Go beyond what is required of you. If someone slaps you across the cheek, if your enemy, clearly not someone who loves you, is mean to you, you turn the cheek for the kiss of friendship. If someone asks you for an article of clothing, you give them 2. The love that Jesus is describing that is so radical and so profound is something that goes beyond the idea of what is required of me into a completely different realm of what it means to love another person. Because we have in our society, in our mind, constructs of what we have to do, what is required of us to be a good person, right? We have ideas of what it means to be a loving person to those around us. You know, one of my favorite stories and examples of this, really just pushing the line of what is required of us. One of my favorite pastors is Francis Chan. I love that guy because he just really loves Jesus. Very obvious. And he was driving down the road one day, and he was struggling through the exact same concept of what does it mean to love a brother and sister? Because if that is the most important thing, if that is the only thing that has eternal consequences, if that is the only thing that you actually take with you, the relationships that you have with other people, nothing else lasts in heaven beyond the impact that you have on the people next to you, then what does that mean to love my brother and sister? And as to answer that call, he saw somebody on the side of the road that needed to be picked up, a hitchhiker. And as he did a recollection of where he was at, he realized he was near a prison. And as he kind of did an inventory of how the person was dressed, what they were wearing, and all of that, he realized that this looked like this person had just been released from prison. And sure enough, he picks this guy up, and he had just been released from prison that day. And in that moment, Francis was really doing what you would say, even a little bit beyond what you'd say is required by you, by society, to be a nice person. You don't feel required to have to pick up a hitchhiker. You don't. But we consider it, oh, you're being a good person. You're going out of your way to do so. With the love of Jesus, Francis has this conversation, and the man reveals he does not have a place to stay. Not only does he not have a place to stay, his wife does not have a place to stay. And his kids don't have a place to stay. Francis takes him home, and he says, honey, he says he didn't do it, but he needs a place to stay. And I'm sure that conversation was a little more complicated than that. But they decided to take him in. They took his entire family in, which is insane. It really is. Like, if you're like me, you hear that, and you're kind of like, ugh, like you cringe a little bit. You're like, oh, like that's just, oh my word. But they led that family to Jesus, and that family, to this day, this very day, became pastors, and they're planting churches. Amen. That's insane. That's an amazing thing. And the reality is not every outcome is going to be like that. But obedience to Jesus requires sacrifice. Sacrifice is not always obedience. Keep that in mind. We don't need to sacrifice everything and be like, I'm super obedient, because that's not how it works. But Jesus, to love others, is going to be sacrificial. It is going to require sacrifice on our parts. And so what does that mean for us as I finish up here and finish up this talk, is that for community, for us to thrive, we have to do a little bit of self-examination. Am I actually friendly to other people, or am I just friendly to the people that I like? Do I talk about the things that I really find insecurity in that attack my identity and create division through gossip, but I feel vindicated in doing so? Do I really realize what it means to love somebody the way that Jesus loved me? Or do I just do what I feel like is socially required of me to be a nice person? Because the reality is you were on the side of the road once. And perhaps you are right now. Jesus drove by, saw a person that was much, much, much worse than a recently released convicted convict. That sentence didn't make sense, but you know what I mean. Someone saw somebody that was much, much worse in a much, much more difficult situation than that, and yet decided to stop by, pick you up, didn't just do what was a nice thing to do and take you to the next McDonald's or whatever it would have been, but took you in, sacrificed his life for you so that you could not just have a place to stay, but a new life, a new, transformed, beautiful, purposeful life. And if you're not a follower of Jesus this morning, that is what I am offering you, that Jesus is driving by you every single day until you wave him down. He's always stopping, always inviting you in, and you have to step in. Today, that can be that day. It could be tomorrow, but I really encourage it to be today. The reality is the love that we have for one another, we love because he first loved us. He loved us in a way that was so ridiculous It didn't make any sense. And that is a love that we extend to one another. That is a love that we extend out. And honestly, like I said already, I think River's Edge, we do a really, really good job. But let us not stop. Let us not weary in doing what is good. Let us continue to take inventory of our own lives as we love our family, love our friends, love the people in our lives. So I'm going to pray, end this time. We're going to worship afterwards, and then we're going to release you. Lord, this is an emotional topic for a reason. Because there are moments that we've been hurt, really, by friends and by people in our lives, by communities that we've been a part of. There are moments where we have been devastated by the things people have said and done to us. Lord, I pray that you heal that today, first off. The things that we are holding on to, the bitterness that we can so easily let take root, that you miraculously heal this morning. That we, as a body, just understand and practice the amazing love that you first showed us. Help us not to deny it. Help us not to just dismiss it, but to actually let that idea saturate our minds, realizing what that means for our future life. And Lord, if we're here today, if we're in a place where we're like, not sure about Jesus, not sure about this Christianity thing, I followed him at one point, but I'm kind of lost my way. Lord, I pray that this is a moment for those of us who are in that position to really just recommit or commit to you, realizing that our lives are broken, that we need you desperately, and that all of us in the room never forget how desperately we need you and how much you love us. Lord, I thank you for the series on Romans and just the way that you have taught us as a body through it. And I'm so excited for what you are doing in the future. I ask this all in the name of Jesus. Amen.